Okay, imagine this. A criminal group starts inside a prison, right? And then in less than, what, 10 years?
Yeah, about that.
It spreads across like almost a dozen countries. So much so that the US government starts looking at laws from the 1700s. It's quite something.
It really is.
So today, let's really get into the story of Tren de Aragua. It's this transnational criminal organization started in Venezuela.
That's right.
And for this deep dive, we're mostly looking at their Wikipedia page, which honestly gives a pretty broad picture, their origins, what they actually do, how they spread so fast, and how governments are reacting, especially the US.
And it's a good starting point because it pulls together a lot of the publicly known info.
Exactly. The idea here is to get past the quick headlines and try to understand what's really going on with this group, what it all means.
Well, what strikes me right off the bat is just how fast it happened. You've got a group formed at a prison in Aragua, Venezuela, maybe around 2014.
Relatively recently, then.
Very recently, in the grand scheme of things. And suddenly they're a major international issue. The leader, Hector Rosenford Guerrero Flores, Nino Guerrero,
Right.
he basically ran things from Tocaron prison. It was like their headquarters, almost.
Until the government took it over in 2023.
Exactly. And then he, along with others, escaped, which, I mean, that alone tells you something about your power, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It suggests they had serious influence even while incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that spread, their global reach. It seems like a huge part of this, maybe the main driver, was the mass migration of Venezuelans over the past few years.
That definitely seems to be a major factor, yeah. It's like the movement of people, sadly, created pathways for the organization to expand as well.
And the list of countries is just...
Wow.
The Wikipedia entry mentions Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Peru, Panama.
Trinidad and Tobago, too.
Right, Trinidad and Tobago, and crucially, the United States. Calling them transnational feels almost insufficient.
It really does. It speaks to a structure that's incredibly adaptable. Opportunistic, maybe.
Yeah, adaptable and opportunistic. And you see that in their activities, too, right? It's not just one thing.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The range is incredibly broad. I mean, you're looking at murder, protection rackets, which really hurt local businesses, drug trafficking, human trafficking.
Awful stuff like forced prostitution.
Yes, and human smuggling, kidnapping for ransom,
Mm-hmm.
even retail theft, robbery, illegal mining,
Bribery, of course.
bribery to keep things running smoothly, and naturally, money laundering to hide where all the cash comes from.
It's such a diverse portfolio, if you can call it that. It suggests they're, well, quite sophisticated organizationally. Built to last, maybe.
Or at least built to adapt and grow. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not just focused on one illicit market.
So in this criminal underworld, who are their friends and enemies, these groups must interact.
They do. According to the source, Tren de Aragua has alliances, groups like Primeiro Comando de Capital, the PCC in Brazil, and others like La Empresa, La Línea, Los Lobos, and interestingly, Los Tiguerones, but only since November 2023.
That's interesting because weren't they rivals before that?
Exactly. That's a really key point. It shows how fluid these relationships are. It's all about pragmatism, power shifts, strategic advantage. Alliances can change fast.
So who are the rivals then, besides Los Tiguerones before that date?
Well, major players. Clan del Golfo, FARC dissident groups, the ELN in Colombia.
Big names.
Yeah, serious competition for territory and influence. And there's mention of a conflict with the Latin kings, too, apparently linked to a murder of a TDA member way back. These rivalries really paint a picture of constant struggle for control.
No, thinking about how you actually identify members, especially crossing borders,
Yeah.
you often think of gangs having specific tattoos, right? Like MS-13 or 18th Street.
Right, very distinct visual markers.
But the Wikipedia page notes that Tren de Aragua doesn't really do that, not in the same way. They compare them more to the older South American cartels like Medellin or Cali.
Who also didn't rely heavily on tattoos for identification. Correct.
So what's the advantage there? Why not have those clear identifiers?
Well, it's a huge advantage, actually. It makes it much, much harder for law enforcement to track them. Think about it operating across multiple countries, different police forces, different intelligence sharing.
Right, it creates ambiguity.
Exactly. It gives them a layer of operational security, allows members to blend in more easily, especially within migrant groups, makes profiling much more difficult.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But if they don't have those obvious signs, how are authorities trying to identify potential members?
It's tricky. The source mentions this point system used by the U.S., particularly in immigration contexts.
A point system, how does that work?
Well, It assigns points based on different indicators,
Fair.
things like, prior convictions linked to the group, or if someone actually admits to being a member, those carry a lot of weight.
Okay, like 10 points for self-admission or a U.S. conviction related to them.
Right. But it also includes things like intelligence reports, testimony from victims or informants, financial links, communications.
And you only need, what, 8 points to be designated a member for immigration purposes?
Just 8 points, yeah. Which, it sounds quite low, and it seems like a system that could be, well, potentially subjective in parts.
Now so.
Because it also includes points for symbolism. Things like certain tattoos, even if not specific TDA ones, clothing. Like, bizarrely, Chicago Bulls sportswear is mentioned.
Wait, Chicago Bulls gear?
Yeah, though the source notes some discrepancy or questioning around that specific interpretation.
Yeah.
But also things like group photos, social media posts with certain symbols. These things add points.
So things like money transfers or intercepted calls seem more concrete.
Much more concrete, yes. But interpreting symbols, clothing choices, that feels more open to error, doesn't it? Especially for an organization that actively tries not to have standard identifiers.
Yeah, it highlights the challenge. Let's zoom in on specific countries. Chile, for instance. They're apparently called the Pirates of Aragua there.
That's what the source is, yeah. And heavily involved in human trafficking, especially during that migrant crisis in Tarapacá.
And even though Chile said they dismantled a branch back in 2022,
The problem clearly didn't go away. Investigations are ongoing. You had that arrest in Texas, Rafael Gámez, late 2024. Chile wants him extradited for human trafficking.
and that really serious accusation from Chile against Dioscoro Cabello, Venezuela's interior minister, about the murder of a Venezuelan dissident in Chile.
That's explosive. It suggests, at the very least, Chile believes there's some level of state awareness or even involvement from Venezuela, which Venezuela denies, of course.
It's deeply concerning. What about Peru?
Peru's had a major impact, too. A big presence in Lima, which has apparently fueled xenophobia against Venezuelans there, unfortunately.
That's awful.
Yeah, and you had the Los Gallegos chapter, reportedly part of TDA, openly threatening local motorcycle taxi drivers, trying to control local racket.
And then the arrests there.
Significant numbers. The source mentions at least 183 suspected members arrested in 2023 alone. That points to a large-scale operation.
And that dynamic with Los Tiburones you mentioned earlier.
Right. In Peru, they apparently went from being allies to rivals, fighting over control of sexual exploitation rackets. Again, highlighting that brutal competition.
Okay, so then the United States. It seems like their presence here really picked up alongside the increase in Venezuelan migration in the early 2020s.
That seems to be the timeline, yes.
Yeah.
The FBI officially confirmed they were operating here in January 2024.
And they've been linked to crimes, but it sounds like the picture is, well, maybe a bit varied depending on where you look in the U.S.
That's a very important point. It's not uniform. Take Chicago. Some officials were talking about hundreds of members potentially being there.
Wow, hundreds.
That was the claim from one police chief. But then a Chicago Sun-Times analysis looked into it and found, well, limited proof of widespread violent crime specifically tied to TDA among migrants. More low-level stuff like shoplifting, some domestic violence arrests.
So a bit of a disconnect there, potentially. What about New York?
New York City seems different. More reports linking alleged members to serious stuff shootings, major retail theft rings, street robberies, forced prostitution, extortion, drug dealing, since around 2022.
And concerns about recruitment in migrant shelters.
Yeah, that's been alleged. And there was that big bust in Queens, January 2025.
Right.
8 alleged members arrested for gun trafficking. They seized 34 firearms. That's significant.
Definitely. Then there was Aurora, Colorado. That situation seemed to blow up online.
It really did. Viral surveillance footage, the mayor claiming the city was being infiltrated. But then the police pushed back a bit, suggesting the incidents were more isolated, not necessarily indicating widespread TDA control.
But arrests were still made.
Oh yeah, 4 men from the video were arrested. They even shut down some apartment buildings, calling them a criminal nuisance.
And that became quite politicized too, didn't it?
Very. President Trump made repeated claims about it, which local authorities pretty much debunked. Meta even labeled some related posts as misinformation. But the narrative took hold for some.
And ICE conducted raids there early this year.
January, February 2025,
Yeah.
resulting in, reportedly, at least one arrest of an alleged member.
We also see mentions for El Paso, Texas, the FBI reporting 41 suspected arrests in 2023. And Salt Lake City, Utah, linking them to shootings, theft, drugs, even sextortion.
So it suggests a presence that is definitely dispersed, popping up in various places. but maybe not always as organized or widespread in every single location, as some initial reports might suggest. It's complex.
This varied picture really sets the stage for the U.S. government's response, which has been, well, pretty forceful.
Extremely forceful. That executive order, January 20th, 2025, starting the process to designate Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization, that's a huge step. It became effective February 20th.
And then using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to start deporting people.
Yeah, pulling out a law that's over 200 years old, that definitely caught people's attention.
There were legal challenges, right? Some deportations were vaulted.
Temporarily, yes. But then, in March 2025, a large group of alleged members were deported to El Salvador anyway, reportedly despite a court order blocking some removals. That caused a massive controversy.
I can imagine. What were the main concerns?
Huge concerns about due process. One judge, Judge Henderson, even made a comparison to Nazi Germany's expulsions, which is incredibly strong language. Critics argued these were summary deportations without proper legal safeguards.
And questions about whether everyone deported was actually TDA.
Exactly. The argument was that many likely weren't members at all, and the use of the Alien Enemies Act itself was challenged. It's historically been used when the U.S. is in a declared war or facing imminent invasion from a foreign government or nation. Using it against members of a criminal gang was seen by many legal experts as unprecedented and potentially inappropriate.
What did U.S. officials say about sending them to El Salvador?
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem made statements suggesting they'd remain in CECOT, that high-security prison in El Salvador, basically for the rest of their lives, highlighting collaboration with El Salvador.
Wow.
Which, understandably, raised major alarms for human rights groups like Cristosal. They pointed to risks of deportations based on flimsy evidence like tattoos, lack of due process, people being held incommunicado, potential enforced disappearances.
And that case of the footballer.
Yeah, the Reyes Barrios, a Venezuelan footballer reportedly deported because he had a Real Madrid tattoo that someone allegedly mistook for a gang symbol. It just crystallizes the potential for terrible mistakes when relying on ambiguous signs without proper checks.
Okay, let's switch gears to Venezuela's response. They took over Tocarón prison, as you mentioned.
Yes, September 2023, a major operation.
But President Maduro's public stance is quite different. It's essentially called Tren de Aragua, a fiction, a construct made up to destabilize Venezuela.
Right, a narrative that deflects internal responsibility and points fingers outward. Diosdado Cabello has been even more explicit.
What has he been saying?
He's alleged connections between Venezuelan opposition leaders, even former Colombian presidents, and Tren de Aragua, accusing them of using the gang for destabilization, funded by Colombian narco-paramilitarism, the whole conspiracy theory, basically. He mentioned figures like El Alexis and alleged opposition plots.
So blaming the opposition and external forces entirely.
Pretty much. Interestingly, Cabello agreed with the U.S. decision to label TDA a terrorist group, but then claimed the real partners were in the U.S. itself.
Wait, so he agrees they're terrorists, but says the U.S. is partnering with them.
It seems contradictory, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also claimed that none of the people the U.S. deported were actually TDA members, directly undermining the entire basis for the U.S. deportations he supposedly agreed with.
That is confusing.
It is. Meanwhile, Venezuela's Attorney General, Tarek William Fabb, he confirmed the group was dismantled inside Venezuela, said they arrested 48 people. But he also acknowledged members are active in Colombia and the U.S., claiming they have opposition support, and Venezuela wants them extradited back.
So even within the Venezuelan government, there seems to be a mix of denial, deflection, and some acknowledgement of an external problem they want other countries to handle by sending people back.
It paints a very complex and, frankly, often contradictory picture from Caracas.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what are the main things that stand out?
Well, first, just the incredible speed and scale of their transnational spread. It's remarkable in a bad way. Second, the sheer variety of their criminal activities. They're into everything.
Right, and the identification issue, how hard it is to pin down members when they deliberately avoid traditional markings.
Definitely. And then the stark contrast in government responses. The U.S. taking very aggressive action using old laws, facing legal and ethical challenges.
While Venezuela offers a mix of denial, blame shifting, and some internal action coupled with extradition requests. And the controversy around the deportations and human rights is huge.
Absolutely huge. It leaves you thinking about the challenges. How do you effectively combat a group that operates like this across so many borders?
And what are the ethical lines? When does the response become disproportionate or risk harming innocent people caught in the middle, especially vulnerable migrants?
Exactly. It makes you question the validity of the narratives coming from both governments, too. How much is real? How much is political spin?
It definitely raises questions for you, the listener, to maybe mull over, like the long-term implications of using laws like the Alien Enemies Act today, or maybe the deeper socio-political reasons why groups like this emerge and spread in the first place.
There's a lot more to explore there, for sure. The human rights side of the deportations, the history of that act, the connection between migration, poverty, and organized crime.
Ultimately, I think understanding Tren de Aragua isn't just about one gang. It's a case study, really. It shows how interconnected crime, migration, and international politics have become in our world.
It really does. It's a stark reminder that a problem starting in one place can very quickly become a global concern with consequences that ripple outwards far and wide.